All right, today we're going to be looking at the sayings of Agur, which are found in Proverbs 30, verses 1 to 33. That is all of chapter 30. And the introduction to these Proverbs is found in verses 1 to 9. First of all, we are told that Agur says these to Ithiel and Ukal. Um, we don't know anything about any of these three men. Um, at one time, it, there was efforts made by commentators to try and equate Agur with Solomon, but that seemed unlikely. So these people are lost to history, but they left these wise sayings. Um, and then in the introduction, we see that Agur really emphasizes his ignorance in comparison to the profound wisdom of God. And there's a sense in which these verses in the introduction sound very similar to portions of Job that speak about the wisdom in creation. He then adds to that the trustworthiness of the words of God again to emphasize God's wisdom being superior to man's. And in doing this, in making it quite clear that his wisdom is nothing compared to God, he is modeling humility that is so important in gaining wisdom. If we're not teachable, if we don't think we have something to learn, then we are not going to be good students of Proverbs. And he ends the introduction with a prayer. And that prayer is that lies would be kept from him so that he wouldn't be deceived. He wants to be wise, but in order to live wisely, we have to live by the truth. And so lies are very dangerous for someone seeking to live a good life. So he wants lies kept from him. And then he asks for what I call a moderate blessing. It's something that we pray for every time when we pray the Lord's Prayer. We pray for our daily bread. And this is the idea of moderation. He wants God to provide for him, but not so much that he would turn his back on God, as the rich sometimes are wont to do. When God blesses them, they forget God. Or, on the other hand, to be so poor that in desperation they might dishonor him by stealing. So that just serves as the introduction. Um, we see here in the sayings of Agur, the Proverbs are classified in what I would call sets of four, not chiastic as we saw earlier in the sayings of the wise, but in groupings of four that have a common theme. Now, there's a number of these found in Proverbs 30, the first being 11:14. It's the only one that doesn't have an introduction. The rest of the groupings of four do, and they talk about different things that have one thing in common. So if we see it, look at the introduction in verse 30:15, we see three things that are never satisfied, four things that's never say enough. It talks about the barren womb and about death. Um, Likely, when paired with the the proverb right next to it, it's a warning against lust and greed, but it may also simply be an observation that we can learn from. Um, in 30:18, we see three things that are too amazing for me, four things that I do not understand. Um, and here it's rising to a crescendo of things that are amazing in the way they move and interact, culminating in the way of a man and a woman together. The beauty of that. And that, again, is put in contrast with the next proverb that talks about the adulterous woman and how she cannot see that she's done anything wrong. In verse 21, we see another listing of four. Under the earth, three things tremble, under four cannot bear up. And here are things that aren't right. If a servant takes the place of a king, or a maidservant takes the place of her of the bride, of the wife of the house. So those are examples of things that ought not to be. 30:24 talks about four things that are small and yet are extremely wise. You know, the lizard on the roof of a king's palace, small and yet easy enough to catch in the hand, and yet you can find them even in a king's palace. And the last one is 30, verse 29. There are three things that are stately in their stride, four that move with stately being, beginning with a lion, not being afraid of any other animal in the jungle, and comparing that ultimately to a king and his army. So this proud state of being, this confidence that's visualized in all of these things. And the rest of the Proverbs fall in between these and often complement them. Now, because this is a short study, we're also going to look at the sayings of King Lemuel. Now, they are found in Proverbs 31, 1 to 9, and they are also very brief. So there's a few interesting things about this. Once again, we don't know anything about King Lemuel. And in the short introduction, we learn something that's somewhat unique, in that this wisdom was given to him by his mother. And so this is the queen mother's advice to the queen. And unlike the other Proverbs in the Bible, this is addressed to kings, how a king should rule. Now, this was not uncommon, or is not uncommon in other ancient wisdom literature, but this small passage here in Proverbs is the only Proverbs that specifically speak to the role of the king and what he should do. It's got a very simple structure. There's two warnings and a command. The first warning is to avoid the trap of womanizing. Now, it's interesting that this is in here, because we know that Solomon himself fell victim to this. And so it's a warning to stay away from the pleasures of women. It would be something that would be uniquely available to a king, who would likely have a harem and access to anything he wanted. But the queen mother warns her son that this is not suitable behavior for a king, distracts him from his true purpose. The second warning is to avoid the trap of alcohol. Obviously, she's not talking about drinking at all, but the abuse of alcohol. And really, that's so that he doesn't lose his purpose and what he's called to govern and to uphold the law, specifically uphold the law for the poor, which serves as an introduction to the single command, which is to remember the poor and speak for them as they have no other voice, to speak for the voiceless. And wow, that's a pretty interesting command for a king, but it shows the value of servant leadership. And really, we see that modeled perfectly in Jesus Christ. So we have one more part of a chapter to look at in the Proverbs, and we'll look at that next week.